Hello and welcome to World News Tonight here on TVP World with me, Ashim Kumar. Our focus tonight is on the floods and extreme rainfall that have been taking place across southwestern Poland. Homes and infrastructure are being destroyed and thousands of people have been evacuated as emergency services do all they can to alleviate the situation. Forecasts also currently do not give reason for optimism as even more rain is expected tonight. This and more in just a moment. First, let's take a look at the headlines. Floods have been affecting more than just Poland. Much of Central Europe is struggling against the weather. Tomorrow, Germany will introduce border controls, a decision that has sparked widespread controversy. They spent months in Russian captivity where they suffered terrible torture. Now, the heroes of Ukraine have returned home. Well, as we've just seen, the flood situation in southern Poland is critical. Many cities have been badly affected, cutting them off from the rest of the country. And the destruction is enormous. Unfortunately, there have also been lives lost. Prime Minister Donald Tusk has instructed his cabinet to take formal steps to declare a state of emergency.
So far, 2 people have died in Poland as a result of the floods in south and southwestern parts of the country. Some places saw between 150 and 200 millimeters of rainfall per day since Thursday, an absolute record. The Kłodzko Valley and neighboring Nysa County were hit particularly hard. Around 300,000 people live in the area. Both regions have many smaller rivers and tributaries fed by the mountain streams separating Poland and the Czech Republic. Thousands have been evacuated. The situation rapidly deteriorated over the course of Sunday. 2 dams have overflowed. Bridges have been blocked off by water, cutting off access to many places. 5 helicopters have been deployed for rescue purposes.
All rescue services are doing everything they can to restore road access to areas that can now not be reached, the number of which is growing.
The Polish authorities are sending more rescue workers to the affected regions. The needs are, however, greater than the available manpower.
We are trying to send in more firefighters and police, as requested by the commandants. Please understand that some of these people are very tired after hard physical work for 24 hours.
More rain is expected in the coming night, further complicating the situation on the ground.
The residents of Nysa are experiencing a tragedy, as we've just seen. Water is flooding their city. Emergency services are evacuating thousands of affected people. Our reporter Marek Steele is near the city. Good evening, Marek. What is the situation on the spot?
Good evening, Ashim. Well, I myself actually experienced the evacuation there as we were filming in this small town nearby in Pachków. We were shooting pictures of a smaller stream that flooded the area and, flooded people's homes. But as we were returning, we heard the news that the Nysa-Kłodzka River has been filling up. And just above the city of Nysa, there's a huge reservoir that's called the Nysa Lake. And that's where the waters from many of these mountain streams simply merge. So the amount of water that was being pumped into that reservoir was simply too much. And the authorities had to start dumping this water below, which resulted in the flooding of the city. The authorities said that 1,600 cubic meters per second of water was being released from the reservoir. You can imagine a huge amount of water simply flowing down the dam there. And the city is located just lower of the dam. Actually, we were there at around 3:30 p.m. to 4 p.m. And we heard news that this river could overflow. So the pictures you're seeing now are just from that moment when the city was already beginning to become flooded, but only the lower areas. So once we left, we knew that it was going to be dangerous. The levee, simply water broke through the levee there and flooded the entire Old Town. So most of the city of Nysa is currently underwater, and that's because of all of the rainfall that's been gathering in these streams and merging into this Nysa River, which will later flow down to bigger cities. So a very tragic moment for these cities here in Opolskie province. People have to be evacuated, and as we've mentioned, forces, police, fire departments from across the country are gathering here. I've seen this myself to help evacuate people from this flooded areas. Back to you, Ashim.
Thank you, Marek. A very tragic and terrifying situation. Do stay safe. The catastrophic flooding in Poland is causing millions of euros in damage that will take months, if not years, to repair. Many people have lost their homes and all of their belongings.
The small town of Kłodzko in southeastern Poland is partially submerged following a dramatic rise of the water level in the local river.
The situation is indeed still very dramatic in many areas. The most dramatic situation is in the Kłodzka Valley, where we have confirmed the first death by drowning.
About an hour to the east, in the town of Dzierżycławice, a dramatic rescue took place after a family car with 2 adults, 2 children and 2 dogs got stranded in the quickly rising floodwater. The family was rescued by first responders from the local volunteer water rescue service. In Paczków, less than 5 kilometers from the Czech border, water came in a flash on Sunday morning.
At 7 a.m. there was no water in our yard, but when we came back 3 hours later, there was a river. We don't have a yard, we don't have a garage, we don't have a gazebo anymore. We're watching our possessions float away. We're waiting. We put whatever we could on the first floor, and we'll see what happens.
Firefighters and other first responders have been put on high alert across the country.
In the last 24 hours, the fire services intervened some 7,500 times. More than 10,000 cars and 45,000 people have been involved in the rescue operations.
Ukraine has offered help to relieve the pressure on Poland's overstretched emergency services.
Moments ago, Ukrainian Prime Minister Denis Shmyhal expressed solidarity with Poland and offered to send 100 first respondents equipped with specialized equipment to combat the flood. This is a truly moving gesture.
However small, the gesture is much appreciated as another much bigger flood wave is expected to come tonight.
In Opole, the evacuation of residents has begun. The situation there is very dynamic. Our reporter, Ovidiusz Nichea, is on site. Good evening, Ovidiusz. How's the evacuation proceeding?
Ashim, I believe the city is preparing for an imminent impact. The evacuations have already begun, although the scale of it is relatively small for now. We also saw some people putting up sandbags in front of their possessions, in front of their homes to try and protect their property. I'm now at the banks of the river and the water levels are very high. You can see from time to time tree branches and other trash being taken by the water, although the main flood wave has not even arrived to the city yet. I'm in Opole. This is the capital of the region, which in the south is flooded. And I think just a few days ago, there was a feeling here that maybe we'll get away with it, that maybe it won't impact the people here. But I think seeing now all of these dramatic images from the south of the region, I think everyone is taking this threat very seriously, and everyone is trying to to be prepared for the worst. Although maybe at this moment we don't know how much of an impact the high water levels will have on the city.
Indeed, Ovidius, it's looking very dangerous, very precarious there. Do stay safe while you're there. In Silesia, several roads remain impassable and rail travel has been disrupted as emergency services continue to battle the consequences of last night's torrential rains. TVP World reporter John Todd joins us now from Katowice. John, what's the latest?
Yes, hello there, Ashim. I join you from Katowice, where earlier this afternoon, there was a crisis management meeting attended by a number of state and regional officials, including the Deputy Prime Minister Władysław Kosiniak-Kamysz, who revealed that helicopters are being used to rescue a number of people along affected areas on the Kłodnicko Valley, where watercraft are finding it difficult to access particular areas. The Interior Minister, Tomasz Szymoniak, also pledged that all infrastructure that's been damaged, and we heard earlier that we're talking about millions of euros of damage, he said that all this would be replaced. We also heard from the president of the Polish Waters body, and they revealed he revealed that there's a huge World Bank funded reservoir of Racibor, which is about 100 kilometers from me. Now that is if you like, an emergency reservoir. They opened it up this morning at around 4:30 this morning, and that's been filling, and the hope is that they'll fill it to something like 90% capacity, and the hope is that it will dampen the wash and perhaps protect some of these cities further downstream, including Wrocław and possibly Opole, from some of the worst excesses of this rain. Now, at the moment, it's not raining here. Throughout the night, we were subjected to something like 24 hours of rain that stopped something like this at around 9 o'clock this morning, and it varied from intense to absolutely torrential. And throughout most of the night, I could hear sirens going. We heard in that report a moment ago that there was something like 7,500 call-outs. In Silesia, there was something like 2,500 call-outs overnight. Now, the forecast is for more rain starting at the early hours, and I suspect many residents and emergency services will be hoping that the worst of it is over and that the rains, when they come, will be less severe. Ashim, back to you.
Thanks for that, John. Let's certainly hope that they are right and it starts to subside. Thank you, and stay safe. The entire Central European region is experiencing extreme weather conditions and serious flooding. While the rains are starting to subside, the situation in many places remains dire, with evacuations underway.
Storm Boris has brought record-breaking rain and snow in an area ranging from Poland's Silesia region to Austria and Hungary, and from Bohemia in the west to Romania in the east. In the Czech Republic, over 250,000 of households are facing power outages, mainly in the Moravian Silesian region. Tens of thousands have been evacuated from towns in the mountainous northeast region, including Opava, Český Těšín and Knov. The town of Česká Ves has reportedly been cut off from the outside world. In the southwest of the country, water overflowed the Husnach Dam near Prachatice, and the hospital in Brno has been evacuated as well. In Austria, a firefighter was killed during a rescue operation in Lower Austria, states surrounding the capital Vienna. Rail services between Vienna and the major city of Salzburg have been suspended. The whole region has been declared a disaster area.
We are experiencing difficult, dramatic times in Lower Austria. For many Lower Austrians, these will probably be the most difficult hours of their lives.
For Austria, an additional challenge is the record early snowfall in the Alps, as melting snow could add to the already critical water levels. In Romania, villages in the east of the country were hit the hardest by the floods. 4 people in the area were killed over the weekend due to the overflowing of the Siret and Prut rivers. At least 5,000 houses have been damaged, and hundreds of people have been evacuated.
All the water entered the house. It tore down the walls, everything. Took the chicken, the rabbits, everything.
While the rain has subsided, it is expected that the floods will remain a problem for the coming days.
So terrible news across the region there. Now let's go to the Polish-German border. Berlin is soon to introduce border controls. My reporter Carolina Stoltman is on site to tell us more. Carolina, what's the situation like at the border now? Are there any signs of what's to come tomorrow?
Hello, Ashim. So yes, I'm here in Subice, or rather on the bridge that connects Subice with Frankfurt, so Poland with Germany. And like you said, tonight is the eve on the introduction of these stricter border controls from Germany. So we can't really tell what the situation will look like exactly tomorrow, but I think it's safe to say that we've already got a little bit of taste of that today. Now let me give you some context. Together with my team, I was roughly 3 kilometers away from the border crossing, a drive that would normally take roughly 6 minutes. Well, we were unable to complete that journey. Instead, we managed to get through around 2.5 kilometers, and that alone took us 2 hours. Now, while we were setting up here on the bridge, some of the drivers still awaiting to cross the border have reached out to us to express their anger and disappointment, and some of them have told us that they've waited today for as long as 4 hours to reach the crossing, because the bridge that I am on, that is the crossing. However, to get to here, you first have to get through the town of Subice, which is where most of the traffic is. Now, the issue at hand is, of course, illegal migration. This is what the German government is trying to handle. This is the reason for the stricter border controls. Now, this approach that they are performing, this has been widely criticized on the international arena by countries like Austria and Poland. Now, I've managed to speak briefly over email with the Polish border services, and they have said that although they decline to comment on the activity of their neighboring counterparts, they also take responsibility and are attempting to prevent any illegal migration attempts into Poland. However, as I'm sure you can see from behind me, the traffic on this bridge really only goes one way. At least this is the case for the moment. Now, we don't know what the situation will look like tomorrow, but of course I will be here reporting it to you live. So I will see you tomorrow. Thank you. Back to you, Ashim.
Thank you for that, Carolina. I know you'll be keeping us fully updated. Ukrainian President Zelensky has said that he wants to present a victory plan to Biden and his 2 potential successors, one that could push Russia to end its war in Ukraine diplomatically. The 2 presidents will meet this month in Washington, D.C. We're now going live to Kramatorsk, where our correspondent Oz Kataji is waiting. Good evening, Oz. What more do we know about the Ukrainian president's plan?
So, still light on details. President Zelensky hasn't given much away. We do know from various things that he said at the Yalta Security Conference on Friday, in an interview with Fareed Zakaria of CNN recently. He said things like that he wants the peace plan that he's going to present to Biden at the end of the month, where he's visiting America, where he'll be visiting Washington and addressing the UN General Assembly in New York. He said he hopes the plan will pave the way for peace, pave the way for a reliable peace, he says. But he also says that it would not end the war outright, but it would help, according to him. Now, again, light on details. We do know today that the president's office did respond to an article written in the German press, in the Bild newspaper, that said that the president's plan included a potential ceasefire along the current lines of engagement between Russia and Ukraine. Now, the president's office has nixed that completely. They said this is fake news from Bild. So beyond that, we only know what the President Zelensky has said. And it does seem that he is hoping that this plan will have some way. But he still says he can't give 100% that it will stop the war and that Putin still has a role to play in all of this. So still the details are yet to be uncovered.
Indeed, we'll be watching closely as it is uncovered. Let's hope that something constructive comes from it. Thank you very much indeed, Oz, for that report. Over 100 Ukrainian prisoners of war were released in a prisoner exchange on Saturday. Ukrainian forces captured several Russian servicemen during the operation in Kursk, paving the way for the release of their own fighters from Russian captivity.
21 Ukrainian officers and 82 enlisted soldiers have returned to Ukraine from Russian captivity. 2 days prior, another exchange, so 49 Ukrainians returned home as well. Some of them spent more than 2 years stuck in prisoner of war camps without knowing whether they would be exchanged until the very last moment.
The whole time the guards were telling us that we are just being transferred. We asked whether we are being exchanged, but we didn't know where we were being moved. Around 3 hours ago, as we got on the bus, we understood that we are going home to our land. When we entered the territory of Belarus, we were sure 100% that we are going to Ukraine.
Saturday also saw 103 Russian soldiers return home as prisoner exchanges are conducted in a 1-for-1 formula. These soldiers have spent a much shorter time in captivity as most of them were captured over the last month in the Kursk region. The static fighting in the trenches in eastern Ukraine rarely results in taking prisoners. The majority of casualties result from shelling and the use of heavy weapons. Fighting distances are so large that soldiers rarely see their enemy's face, and the use of small arms is rare. The Ukrainian operation in Kursk was in turn mobile and conducted in an area without clear lines of fortifications. This allowed the Ukrainians to surround some Russian units, taking dozens of prisoners at a time. Prisoner of war exchanges have been taking place more often in recent weeks. However, as the Ukrainian operation in Kursk has stalled and fewer Russians are taken prisoner, they will likely become less frequent again.
Staying with Ukraine now, the head of NATO's military committee, Admiral Rob Bauer, says that Ukraine has the legal and military right to strike military targets deep inside Russia to gain combat advantage. However, there is still no consent from the US and other countries for Ukraine to use long-range weapons provided by them for this purpose. Meanwhile, President Zelensky is presenting a victory plan to President Biden as the US prepares a new aid package. The two are set to meet in Washington later this month. And the situation in Kursk is worsening as Vladimir Putin's army has launched a counter-offensive. There's clearly a lot to pick through about the situation in Ukraine, and we'll be talking about some of these issues with my guest, Adam Yasser, news director at TVP World. Adam, hello, and thanks for taking the time tonight.
Good evening.
Good evening. So the US is dragging its feet about allowing Ukraine to strike military targets inside Russia. What, if anything, do you think might change its stance?
Well, it seems the United States and other allies in the NATO alliance take these measures with some delay. So first, there is a lot of pressure, discussion in the public, in the media. And President Zelensky mentions this several times, and then after some time, after some pressure, the allies move ahead and provide what Ukraine needs. It's still very hard to understand why this delay always happens.
Yes, the thing is, I mean, John Kirby, White House National Security Advisor, has given a justification for this delay by saying that Vladimir Putin warned he would consider the West directly involved in the conflict if Ukraine was allowed to use these weapons. But then he goes on to say that this is not an unusual type of threat for Putin. So it's counterintuitive, isn't it? I mean, they're saying we're being held back by this threat, even though we know that it's a standard threat from Putin. What do you make of that?
I think a lot of it has to do with domestic U.S. politics. If there was a wide consensus in Washington, bipartisan consensus in Washington about supplying Ukraine with whatever they need, I think it would be much easier for the Biden administration to move ahead. But they are constantly under pressure from the Republicans who, and particularly Donald Trump and his running mate, J.D. Vance, who are saying, they will be able to finish this war in one day, quote unquote, and, through a diplomatic solution rather than strength of arms. So, for Biden, the space for maneuver there is small, particularly that, for obvious reasons, for both for him and for the Democratic candidate Kamala Harris, winning the election is absolute priority.
Understood. Although the stance has been the same since before, the elections raised the election raised its head. Now, Keir Starmer has indicated that he may allow British Storm Shadow missiles to be used for long-range targeting of Russian military sites. What do you think has brought this kind of change in his position on this?
Well, I think the British, to their credit, have been much more decisive in all of this, but they're unlikely to act without consensus with Washington. To make matters worse, Germany is also vacillating, and Chancellor Scholz admitted in a recent interview. The German leader admitted in a recent interview that some German citizens do not support Ukraine as much as he does. This, of course, followed the rout of his party in local elections. So the US is not alone in delaying this. But again, I think, like in the US, it's also in Germany. It's domestic considerations. So the British are pushing, and I think eventually, of course, Washington is going to relent. But I think really the focus now is switching to the next few months before the U.S. election. We just heard again the vice presidential candidate Vance outlining what he called the Trump peace plan. And it is obvious that it involves effectively freezing the conflict at the current line, the current front. And it also hints at demilitarizing Ukraine and preventing it from joining NATO. So, effectively, that would mean Ukraine's surrender of 20, maybe 30% of its territory to Russia. So, for Zelensky, this is to me a bigger risk than even this delay with the weapons.
Understood. Now, you mentioned peace plan. President Zelensky has one of his own. Now, he's being very tight-lipped about what it contains. What's your impression of what might be acceptable in such a peace plan to the Ukrainian people and the president himself?
Well, Zelensky is insisting that the peace plan must be based on Ukraine's earlier 10-point plan. So, first of all, with the withdrawal of Russian forces, compensation, return of children and other persons captured, Ukrainians captured by the Russians, a number of points. And the difference this time seems to be that he's prepared to accept Russians taking part in this, if only to demonstrate that the Russians are not serious about peace. Because if an invitation to the Russians is extended, this is about to the Chinese, to the Indians, who are increasingly involved in diplomacy around this. So it puts pressure on Putin to come to these talks in good faith. And of course, Zelensky and many others in the West very strongly doubt, and probably rightly so, that Putin has that kind of good faith. So for Putin, the best outcome is actually the plan put forward by Trump and J.D. Vance, freezing the conflict and preventing Ukraine from joining NATO. So Zelensky obviously has the opposite agenda. He wants the Russians out, and he wants the freedom of his country to determine its future, including joining NATO. So I think there's a lot of maneuvering at the moment. The Chinese are out there. I will remind our viewers that Finnish President Alexander Stubb, who was on TVP World a few days ago, mentioned that rather than Donald Trump, it's the Chinese President Xi who can make this one phone call to Vladimir Putin and force him into a serious conversation about peace.
Indeed, lots of manoeuvring going on, as you say, and we shall, of course, be watching it very closely here at TVP World. Thank you very much, Adam, for taking the time to share your analysis. Bye-bye. Good night.
Good night.
And that's all from us here on TVP World. Good night.